Thank you for coming out on this frigid cold night. I think we're going to make it worth your while. It's pretty darn cold out there, and you guys are intrepid to being here. Thank you for that. My name is Marcia Eli. I get to say a few words of welcome on behalf of the Center for Brooklyn History and the Brooklyn Public Library, which we are a part of, and the Arts and Culture team. BPL Presents, which I am a part of. Tonight's program began with a conversation that I had with award-winning journalist Trymaine Lee about his powerful new book, 1,000 Ways to Die: The True Cost of Violence on Black Life in America. The book is personal, but also broad, exploring truths about our society and the impact of guns and violence on Black men. We talked about the reality of communities where boys and girls are born into trauma and what can and is being done to address the needs, to provide support, to make change. And so we came up with a program that is not just about understanding a problem, but also addressing the solution. And we invited a panel of experts who are leading the way. To complete the experience, we have copies of Trymaine's book, which started the whole thing, 1,000 Ways to Die. And we also have copies of Gore's book, who's one of our panelists, Treating Violence, available at our shop. I really hope you'll explore these works because they're deep. If you didn't already explore them when you arrived, and following the program, Trymaine and Rob too will be at the front to sign copies. After the moderated conversation, we'll turn to questions from you. Our ushers are going to bring a mic to you in your seat. Please just help out by making it clear where you are, maybe standing if you're comfortable when you speak, and keeping your questions as brief as possible. So now it's my real honor to tell you about each of our panelists. Trymaine Lee is the best-selling author of 1,000 Ways to Die: The True Cost of Violence on Black Life in America, a sweeping investigation into the generational toll of gun violence and the systems that shape Black life in the United States. A Pulitzer Prize and Emmy Award-winning journalist, Trymaine is a contributor to MS Now, which is formerly MSNBC, and the past host of the acclaimed Into America podcast, where he explored race, power, and democracy through deeply reported storytelling. A contributing writer to the 1619 Project, his work has received multiple Webby and Signal Awards, NAACP Image Award nominations, and recognition as Adweek's Podcast Host of the Year. His reporting on gun violence in Chicago earned an Emmy in 2018, and in 2006 he shared the Pulitzer Prize as part of the Times-Picayune's coverage of Hurricane Katrina. He has been named to the Route 100 and Ebony Power 100 lists of the most influential African Americans, and is a former fellow at New America and Harvard's Institute of Politics. He lives with his family in Brooklyn. Barry Cooper, Coach Coop, is an educator, author, and organizer with more than a decade supporting young men of color in challenging circumstances. Barry established the B.R.O. Experience Foundation in 2020 to expand the scope of his transformational work. The B.R.O. Experience, which stands for Brothers Redefining Opportunity, engages and develops young men of color to build strong leaders of tomorrow. As an educator, facilitator, and certified mindfulness instructor, Barry has led hundreds of workshops on navigating emotions, identity, and decision-making. He is dedicated to youth development and has served as Dean and Director of Culture at Eagle Academy for Young Men, has taught at CUNY Fatherhood Academy as an adjunct life and wellness educator, and has mentored formerly incarcerated youth through the New York Department of Probation. He's been vice chair of the Brooklyn NAACP Educational Committee and has run for local office. More recently, the B.R.O. Experience won a coveted 2025 Spark Award from Brooklyn.org and Barry was named a 2025 David Prize winner. As an experienced event and program organizer, Barry created Little B.R.O Summer Camp, and his books include The Provider, a guide for co-parenting dads, and a forthcoming children's book. Dr. Rob Gore is an emergency medicine physician and community activist. For close to 20 years, he's been exploring and developing programs and solutions that focus on community violence and other disparities affecting urban and global health. He has been named a CNN hero and has been included on the Route 100 list. He has been featured on CNN, NBC, ABC, BET, and in the New York Times, among others. He has lectured around the US, the Caribbean, South America, and Asia, and worked in East Africa, Haiti, and South America. He currently lives in Brooklyn, New York, with his family, and his author is the author of Treating Violence. And our moderator tonight, Irvin Weathersby, is a Brooklyn-based writer and professor from New Orleans. His work has been featured in Harper's Bazaar, Esquire, The Atlantic, and elsewhere. He's received fellowships and awards from the Voice of Our Nations Arts Foundation, the Research Foundation of CUNY, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the American Council of Learned Societies, and the Mellon Foundation. His first book, In Open Contempt, Confronting White Supremacy in Art and Public Space, was released in January 2025. It's a really amazing thing to have you all here in this room together in the same space, right next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, where we can listen to you and all of your thoughts and wisdom and perspectives. I really want to say how honored we are to host this tonight. Please help me welcome everybody to the stage.
Good evening. How y'all doing? Thank y'all for coming out. We know it's cold out there and you could be a lot of places, but you're here, so thank y'all.
They call it brick, right? That's what it is, right? It's
The hawk is out.
the hawk is out. Yeah, so thank y'all, honestly, for being here. So I just want to start with this book and just thinking about some of the ideas that you discuss here. And just to kind of ground this conversation, I want us to think about how we've all been impacted by gun violence. And I'll kind of share a story that really kind of moved me as I've been living here in Brooklyn for the past almost 18 years now. In 2019, unfortunately, I happened to see the last murder committed of that year. I was coming back from a party with my wife, and across the street from me, we see a pool of blood in a vestibule. And we learned later on that a young man was stabbed to death. And that was the last recorded murder of 2019. I was like, man, okay. All right, that was a lot to process. A couple months later, on the same block, a young man was gunned down in broad daylight. And this made the news. It was a big ordeal. And I actually was on the way to pick up my son. My son was a toddler at the time. Fortunately, I was actually running behind that day. And I may have been, otherwise I may have been caught up in that crossfire. But what really struck me about that moment as I was thinking about it is that on that same corner where this young man was gunned down, there's a mural to another young black man who was gunned down, maybe in the 80s and the 90s. And it just hit me like, man, like how long are we going to continue to go through this? How long are guns going to continue to plague our community? And so I want to open with that. I want to start with the history. Like, where does this come from? How did we get here with the flood of guns and trauma that are plaguing our communities?
Thank you, brother. Your experience isn't different than a lot of our experiences, what we witness in our communities and our families. And I think there are some easy, convenient answers, but I think the reality and the truth is that we've been trying to wipe off the residue of deep violence since our feet first landed in the Western world. Many people tend to believe that enslaved Africans were a natural byproduct of wars that were happening on the continent, when in fact European powers, as gun technology was rising, was plying regional African powers with guns to create and foment war and instability, to create more enslaved people. And so I've been wrestling with this idea of what it means to carry the spiritual burden of violence before we even ever got here, that our actual bodies were traded and bartered for weapons. And then we arrive in the Western world with more guns and more violence, violence that would tail us from the Civil War, through emancipation, Reconstruction, its bloody tearing down, the Civil Rights era, Reaganomics, the 80s, the crack epidemic, the 90s, to this moment right here. And so I think we can talk about the machinery of gun violence, the cogs of the actual instruments of death. We could talk about the violence that precipitates the pulling of a trigger, the violence of hunger, the violence of lack of access to quality health care and housing and education and all of those things. But the violence is truly threaded into the very fabric of this nation. And so often we've been the recipients. It's a violent nation, period. But for us in particular, to keep us in bounds and to keep us as something other and a second, third, fourth class citizenship. And I think we're still seeing the reflection of all that precipitating violence.
Look, it's a lot to hold when we take that long view. And so I want to open it up to the other panelists here, Rob and Barry here. As I was reading this book, I was struck by several things, but one is that Trymaine almost died writing it, right? But the process of reading it, I think, is also in ways traumatic. Like, we feel certain things that are triggered as we are reading this and understanding, like, oh, wow, how has this touched me? What am I holding on to? What are the traumas that I still need to process? And I wonder if you can kind of just talk about your reading experience and how this book has highlighted potentially your own experiences, not just necessarily with just gun violence, but trauma and the like.
This is my 24th year as a physician, and I've worked in emergency departments in New York City and in Chicago, and have been seeing warfare really being practiced in the United States. Matter of fact, a few weeks ago, I trained some Navy SEALs who were in our emergency department before they were deployed, because this is the closest thing that you're going to see to combat before you wind up going overseas. And I talk to them a lot about trauma-informed care and looking at trauma through a humanistic lens. I'm not just trying to train like soldiers to go out and kill somebody, but they do spend time in our emergency department to kind of see the humanistic side of what we deal with as practitioners. But reading the book, I told Trymaine, I told Irvin, and Barry, I started crying when I was reading the book. I was crying when I was reading my own book. I was crying when I'm listening to the story, reading the stories, because even though we all grew up in different places in the United States, me and Barry grew up in Brooklyn, but all of our families are from the South. And the story of Northern migration, the story of escaping trauma, the story of trauma that's been experienced by not even far begone ancestors, our immediate ancestors, ones that we could actually touch, smell, and have an intimate relationship with, they all dealt with the same kind of things. And so it just kind of speaks to, I think the more we tell these stories, the more we're able to process it, so we can get to a point that, I don't want to say we normalize the trauma, but we get to a point that, okay, we acknowledge it, and now we can move on and we can figure out what we can do with it to change the situation.
Yeah, Doc, I think that was spot on. That was really good. I think a through line that I've been pulling out of the book that Trymaine did so well, and what frustrated me, honestly, I was telling him downstairs, and I told my wife and one of my employees, Six, how I kept reading and hearing myself, my own story. And it was the story of the kind of like the coming of age of who Barry Cooper is, and all of the trials and tribulations, and dealing with all of the systematic silent violence that is happening to many Black and brown people, but Black and brown boys, from educational violence, from economic violence. But then to hear Trymaine's story and his pursuit to escape that, all of the weight and the pressure and the silence that we have to hold as men, because even when we understand the vocabulary of emotional regulation or how to articulate, oftentimes our families don't know how to receive it and hear it. So we never really have a safe space. So our safe space sometimes is the bottle, some marijuana, something to kind of like ease that pain, even in the midst of our success. And I think, With my organization, the B.R.O experience, we have had immense success over the last 5 years, but that comes with a weight of responsibility, and it's something that I've never been prepared for. So I'm actively like, you could ask my wife, I'm in the bed at night having Zoom calls, right? Like in my dreams, talking to people, right? Having these conversations where now I have to tell myself, okay, how do you take a break? Because if you continue that, what happens to you? Because I'm depleting as I'm giving to the world, because I don't want my world to experience the 1,000 ways to die anymore. I don't want to see a black boy having to go through what I went through being a single dad or a co-parenting father at the age of 16, 17. Like, I didn't want those things. So, it's just a lot. I think it's a big mirror that I kind of felt, and it just made the responsibility even that much louder for me.
Thank you, brothers. Another thing that really moved me about this book is that you didn't necessarily shy away from your own experience with guns. And I think it's easy that, once we get some degrees, once we kind of get some education, once we kind of get a platform, we can step back and be removed and have this conversation almost from sort of tower and not necessarily be close to the people who are feeling it most. So I wonder if you can speak, Trymaine, first about your experience and how ultimately you could have been a different person had you made, a poor decision. There's too many times in my life where I'm thankful that I didn't have access to a gun because I'm certain that I would have made a bad decision. I'm certain, because I've been angry enough and upset enough that I would have made those bad choices. So I want you to kind of start us off, and then I want you guys to kind of share what moments were, almost pivotal in your life to kind of say, you know what, I could have made this bad choice. I could have, resorted to violence, but I chose not to.
I think one of the idea of frustration that I come across often is this idea that it's bad people who are making bad decisions, right? And for black men and boys, we aren't often given the room and the breadth to make mistakes without getting knocking your head without getting your head knocked off. There was a situation in every single day, almost, I'm so thankful to be here in this moment for a number of reasons. But I think back to one time in particular, which I write in the book. My brother and some of our friends were at a club, and one of our close friends got into a situation trying to protect some girls at the club. And it's still let out, so it's like 3 a.m. Everybody's been drinking, and a lot of people high. And the one guy pulled out a gun, and our friend had a gun too. And as he ran to our car, me and my brother were sitting in the car, he tossed the gun into the passenger side, and he took off with his motorcycle. And the guy chased behind him. And so we chased behind him. And so as my brother's driving and I got the gun, there wasn't much of a choice. If he would have started shooting at our friend, I would have definitely shot back. And that feeling of nobody's there to protect us but us. And certainly that gun shouldn't have been in the equation. The gun that we had, the gun that they had, all in our 20s, speeding through Philly, chasing each other with guns, and knowing what I would have definitely done because of the people that I loved to protect him and to protect us, and thinking that everything could have been completely different and there would have been no leniency for me. And I don't know if there should. I don't know if there should have been. I don't know. What happens if I would have shot at them and missed and hit some kid, or any number of things could have happened. But for the grace of God, that's not what happened. No shots were fired. And I think about all the people I've talked to over the years, young men who were just like me, who got themselves in a really bad situation. And then we ask why, we get whys, and think about the funnel of guns into our communities, the lack of tools and resources to unpack what's really chipping away at us on the inside. Some of our anger, some of our stress. What does it mean to not feel protected? What does it mean to feel that the only means of protection for ourselves is a gun? And then not having much to lose, or feeling like you don't have much to lose. And so every day I'm just, blessed and fortunate to be here, honestly.
I think when I was 11, I started carrying razor blades and screwdrivers to school. I got jumped on the corner of Myrtle Avenue and Washington Park. This before it got gentrified. So it was a very different neighborhood in 1986, 1987. And I I said, this is never going to happen to me again. And, I went to junior high school in Bushwick, so I got to take the 54 from right by Fort Greene Projects all the way down past Marcy Projects, past Broadway Junction, or Broadway and Myrtle, and then get all the way down to Myrtle and Knickerbocker. And then I got to get back home in the afternoon and do it all over again. So I did that. I carried that stuff with me from age 11 up to age 18. And I did well in school, with the exception of like the 7th grade, but we won't talk about that.
A transition period.
That was a transition period. But it all came back to, I was scared. And just from a medical point of view, when somebody winds up being injured, they have any kind of traumatic experience, it's normal to have an acute stress response. And those symptoms can last anywhere from like 0 to 3 days. That is a normal thing to happen. If you fall off your bike, you get jumped, you get hit by a car, it's normal for you to feel anxious. The problem is when you wind up having some sort of experience and it's a violent act that perpetrated, the likelihood of you developing PTSD is a lot higher. And so when you start seeing these acts of trauma, these acts of violence, and your whole thing is, I don't want to hurt anybody, I just want to get home, and I want to get back to my loved ones into a safe space. And you'll do whatever it is to ensure that happens. You wind up making these decisions. And, you having the gun being tossed next to you in the car while people might be shooting at you. Barry, I know where you grew up too, so I already know some of the situations that you're probably going to tell us about, and we've commiserated about some of the stuff that some of our young men that we've worked with together at Eagle Academy have gone through. But it all comes back to wanting to feel safe. And when you can't feel safe, you're going to do whatever it is possible. You might carry a tool. You may also self-medicate with weed, alcohol, mollies, pills. There was a young woman who was talking with us just 10 minutes ago about this very situation with her, one of her relatives, but you're going to do whatever it is possible. The problem is when you mix this substance abuse, you mix the stress, and you've got this tool that can cause harm in somebody who's feeling powerless, a lot of dangerous things can happen, and we see the direct outcome of people who may not have necessarily had a support system to be able to talk them down and have some reasonable words to help them process and regulate their nervous system in the setting of a traumatic experience that's occurred.
Yeah, I grew up on Lexington and Marcus Garvey in the 90s, so I'll be here all day telling you stories about weapons, but I think if I'm going to be really transparent in this moment, I think that I often think about having a weapon now in the way that we are seeing violence perpetuated on our people constantly by law enforcement. And sometimes I will not lie, I look at my front door and says, when is somebody gonna knock on my door talking about their ice, and I'm not talking about delivering it. So there's this constant reframing that I have to do as a man and as a scared human being every single day when we walk outside. And right, like that is traumatic. Speaking to what Doc is saying, right? Like there's windows of like how much information we can take in, but when you're taking on months, years of seeing people ripped out of their homes, disappearing, you like, not me, right? And then what does that do as you start to have like these conscious conversations with your significant other, like, yeah, I think we need to have a gun in here, knowing that you got a 4-year-old son running around the house, right? Like that is not healthy. That is not healthy, and we should not be living through those type of circumstances. And I think it goes back to even our childhoods, right? The proliferation of guns is way bigger than us, and it has been dropped in our communities. And when you put people in community who have no other choice, they will operate as savages. They will operate in chaotic behaviors. And I think that we can't just talk about our stories, because our stories is like dangled by somebody else or another system that has to take responsibility for it. So if I had a gun, it's because what the culture and what the society told me I had to do, and I would just respond and trying to protect my being.
You know, I think about often we use this phrasing when we talk about police all the time. When your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
When we think about young white folks in this country, or white people, period, the idea that they own guns for protection doesn't even send off any bells. When we talk about black people wanting to arm themselves because of that same kind of fear, we start getting concerned because of the baked-in criminality, right? The baked-in, the idea that there's something innately criminal within us. But one thing that we do know for certain is that guns bring you closer to death either way, right? Protection or not.
No matter what, right? I mean, and there was once against the law for us to own weapons, right? And so that's also like a really complex thing that you kind of delve into the book as well, whether it's people who look like us who are manufacturing the guns, who need jobs, people who are working in spaces to house, the criminalized folk who've made some tough choices. But I also want to talk about, this book is not just about trauma, right? There's some hope here. There's some optimism here. There's some light in terms of thinking about how can we work out of this situation. For you, it seems as if like you were able to kind of leave your environment and go to Hershey and go to a boarding school and thinking about, how could my life be different? And I want to think about like what, if you can answer or speak to what that did for you, and ultimately what you guys, Rob and Barry, what are you trying to do for these young people that you're serving, even though they're still in these communities? How are you trying to create a space where, in many ways, they can exit their communities, even briefly?
So many years ago, 1990 at this point, I went to a school called the Milton Hershey School. It's the richest high school in the country, an endowment of $18 billion. But you have to be poor to get into it, right? So you have to be well below the poverty line, but everything is at your disposal. I mean, it's a beautiful campus, meals, food, clothing, everything is there for us, but we're all coming from similar environments. Whether it's rural, whether it's inner city, all of us arrived there because we came from poor families. And I think part of the thing that helped me was to remove me from my circumstance so that the resources weren't the issue. Some of the toxicity that I saw around me wasn't an issue because there's nothing inherently wrong with any of us. It's the violence of all those structural systemic things that chip away at us. And so part of my growth was being out of that environment, but also being a place where I could be confident in myself and to flourish. But even in that, it wasn't easy, and I detail some of that in the book because we're all still carrying the baggage from whence we came. But I think the true healing part for me in this entire journey, in some ways, was actually writing the book. I think part of it is identifying that what you're holding actually is trauma. Because it's so normalized and happens so often that that pain in your gut, that fear, that concern, all the cortisol, we don't name it. We don't have a name for it. It's just normal life. And so even though the book grapples with the weight of trauma and the weight of death and everything that we're carrying, the prickly parts that we're carrying inside of us, all that is balanced against the preciousness of life, not just the precarity of it. And so my true hope is that through this book, you talk about this idea of a mirror and reflection, that people can see the truth about the ways in which we've lived and the ways in which we've died and understand that, again, ain't nothing wrong with us. And if we want to understand the violence that happens to us, that we experience, look no further than the violence that surrounds us and has guided us from those very first footsteps into the hell of the Western world to this moment. And owning our narrative and identifying and putting a shape to what we're carrying.
I think what helped me, I played sports. I ran track in high school and part of college. I still train. Actually, Brother Quadro is one of my Morehouse brothers. We got a couple of us in the room, but he's one of my main jiu-jitsu training partners. So we're grown men. I'm be 50 this year, and I have to be on the mats like between 3 to 4 days a week because that's the way I can regulate my nervous system. Running track, I didn't have the language at the time, but running itself, that's proprioceptive input. That's also cardiovascular work. That's causing some of your endorphins to kind of surge, and that cortisol to actually drop, which means if that drops, I can actually be present. I can actually think through situations. So if I'm going to experience a trauma, if a trauma presents itself, I can think through all the different possibilities to get out of that situation. And a lot of us get so caught up with the trauma that we've experienced that we can't even get to a point where we can allow ourselves to physically be present. I got a 5-year-old. How's your son now? 4? Yeah, 4. So the new parenting language is my kid's not having a tantrum. They are dysregulated, which is true because they are dysregulated. They are not present. When that kid is having a tantrum and they're out of mind, body, and spirit, and you cannot bring that little kid back until you either throw some cold water. Sometimes my kid, I'm not gonna lie, he might get a little pluck in the back of the head and he's like snap out of it. I'm not beating him, but when he gets that pluck, you throw some cold water on him. He's like, oh, wow, I needed that shock to my system, and now we can have a conversation. But at least he's getting to a point where you can regulate. So we've got to figure out all these different activities so that we can figure out what we can actually do to bring ourselves back to this level of being in this space that we understand what's going on around us.
Yeah, with us at the B.R.O experience, and this is indicative to our work, and I think unfortunately, is what makes us unique is that we not only give therapeutic care, but we give emotional education, right? Like we teach through cognitive behavior therapy because it is a practice. So they can actually take that practice, and if they get good at it, they can mirror it in their households. Because oftentimes, like I mentioned earlier, somebody in your house might be going to therapy, but I would say maybe 80% of the house is just waiting for you to get better, right? So as you are navigating this journey, you got a whole bunch of people around you that don't know what to do with your emotions, don't even know what to do with their own emotions, and then you never really heal, or you never are on a healing journey, because once you walk away from that utopia feeling with your therapist, you are actually going back into reality. So we teach our young men in two ways. One, this is the practice. This is the practice that you're going to use. If you see something in your household, you're not going to be the household therapist, but you're going to be able to have grace with your mother when she is like not able to articulate herself. And you're going to actually reframe while she's not reframing. So that way you can bring down that energy and you can cope in that household. And then we give them therapeutic care to support that inner boy that somebody has forgotten about, unfortunately. And then we heal them. And in our work, the reason why we call it the B.R.O experience is because we never leave you. We're not bound by 10-month, 12-month programs. Yes, we have those, but you are coming to a B.R.O space. We have a physical space that we are going to put around this globe if God allowed me to be on this earth, or whoever else take this over, because what we understand is that people need space to be nurtured, because our society, unfortunately, doesn't look like it's changing any other time. So I think that is what we do. We teach emotional education with this context of like, you're gonna understand what it is to know how to cope and deal with what's happening in real time, so you have the space to heal. And I think that's really critical. And unfortunately, we don't see that. We only see either dealing with the crisis, and then when it's post-crisis, we want to medicate, which is nothing wrong, or we want to just put a person in therapy while their environment is still unhealthy. And we try to give them the tools so that way they can simmer some of the experiences that they have.
And I love that because it's so important, because as men, and black men in particular, and boys, we're carrying a specific kind of weight, bearing the trauma of everything else that the rest of us are exposed to, with also the crosshairs of the fear of black manhood.
About 15 years ago, I founded an organization called KAVI, which is the Kings Against Violence Initiative. And KAVI is a hospital, school, and community-based violence intervention program. And we have all these different components. Actually, that's how Brother Barry and I met doing work at Eagle Academy. Because people are going to interface with trauma in so many different spaces. What happens in the hospital when somebody gets shot or stabbed, that's one type of trauma. When you got to go back home and you're in your community, that's a different kind of trauma. When you're at school and you're able to mask, or at least you're in a supportive space, but because you're focusing on academics or sports or whatever, you can mask that stuff there, and you need a different kind of support system. But the ultimate goal is to really create these environments that allow people to heal, to allow them to express themselves, so we can at least and come up with the language to describe what it is you're feeling. Yeah. You know, med school is a long ass time, and residency is too, and is grueling. Anybody who's done any kind of professional studies, educator, parent, caretaker, you know the specific language that comes along with it. But when you develop that language, you can shorten the amount of time that it takes to express your thoughts. And when you can shorten that time, you can articulate those needs a lot quicker. And you can articulate those needs quicker, you can get that emergency help and long-term help without people dismissing you because they don't understand what it is that you're saying. So I think all the stuff that we're doing is really cultivating a series of different spaces. You know, Trymaine has been doing tremendous work from the podcast, the journalism level, now with the book, because people understand that language. Barry's been doing the same thing. Irvin's been doing the same thing. And a lot of people in this audience that, you know, I see some of the faces. I can't see too far in the back right now. But there are a lot of people who are really being a part of this community support system that we hope that we can augment.
Thank you, guys. So I want to bring up something that you guys have already touched on. It's almost kind of like the big elephant in the room, especially in our community. And this is grand word called therapy, right? I have a therapist, and I want to, thank you. We'll just open it up a little bit here. If you are okay with this, I'm going to ask you a question. I would love for you to respond. How many people here have a therapist? You want to raise your hand? Oh, that's a lot. That's great. I would have loved to see every hand raised, because to be human is to be in conflict. Every human needs a therapist. That's my honest opinion. And I started therapy when I wasn't in a crisis. I had seen my wife go through therapy, and she had done it successfully. I was like, you know what? Maybe I should do this. Let's figure it out so I can get these tools. And I say all that to say that the book ends in a really tough place. This is an emotional place for me when you talk about one of your dear friends who died by suicide. And one of my dear friends also attempted his life. He thankfully survived. And 2 weeks ago, very bizarrely, another friend of mine told me that he attempted his life in October. And I want to figure out how can we get to spaces where we can talk to each other as men and reach out, whether we're seeing a therapist or not. How do we get to these spaces where we can say, hey, you know, the world is not too much. Like, you can still be here with us. I wonder if you want to talk about how you process that and what that meant for you, and how you guys kind of help other people get to a space where they feel comfortable seeking therapy and thriving in therapy.
Yeah, I'm still really mad at my homeboy, for real. Like, I'm actually not cool with this dude. I love him to death, but that he went out the way he did and took his life, it still just hurts. Like, I could cry now thinking about it. And that you wonder, as close as I thought we were, and we were, did I create, again, you can't blame yourself because there's a peculiar kind of grief, but did we have, a strong enough foundation of engaging with each other on a certain kind of level with each other? Even when we're close, is it a practice to check on each other all the time, right? And that I don't know what was eating away at him, what was weighing on him, but I know for far too many Black men, we don't feel comfortable engaging with our friends or family, let alone a therapist. And so I've been trying to be more proactive in, not again, trying to prevent any self-harm, but how do we make sure that you know I love you, that you know I got you, that it's Tuesday and I'm just calling to see what's good with you, right? And I'm just trying to find ways, because that kind of grief, and too many, the numbers are rising of young men who are taking their lives. Growing up, we always heard that it was white boys. It was white boys and men who killed themselves. But I heard from a source a long time ago in New Orleans who would call me and talk about, the cases I was covering. And he said, there's a lot of suicide in the hood. It just looks very different. That self-destructive nature that we see so many young boys engaging with, and hustling and shooting and all the gunplay and all the reckless behavior and all the self-medication is a form of self-harm. We just don't call it that. And so it may look like that, or it may look like a professional who can't fill that big gap they feel inside them with working harder, or awards, or positions, or titles. And so I think we have to be honest with ourselves. And I feel like, just by the show of hands, that we're getting to that place where it's more, accepted, that it doesn't carry the stigma. But clearly we have to find some way. And hopefully identifying the trauma in the first place can help.
I think one thing that helps is just kind of being a part of a group or a community where check-ins become the norm. I know with our organization, first thing we do is something called Fist of Five, where, you hold up your fist. If you're like at a 0, it's like, okay, you might not be so great, but if you got 5 fingers up, okay, that means you're in a good space. But we do that just to kind of an opening part of the check-in. Just also, some of us coming from, Morehouse, where you see people that look like you, and it's a different kind of community. So you check in with your brothers. You be like, yo, you good? And not just like as a term of some sort of greeting. It's like, no, you really good? What's going on? You okay? You don't look so hot right now. And that became something that I've tried to continue to do, and I have other people to do that for me. But it's the Superman complex or superhuman complex that many of us hold on, which is why we can't express the traumas that we've experienced. When I started going to therapy, I haven't been in a while, I probably need to go back, but when I first started going, I wasn't in a crisis situation, and I did it, on an ongoing basis, but then I stopped. And then when I had a crisis situation when a friend of mine was murdered, and I had a panic attack while I'm working in the emergency department in our critical care and trauma emergency department. It also happened around the same time I was taking care of another kid who was shot whose brother I had pronounced a few years prior after his brother was killed by the police. And so it was a culmination of all these different emotions that came to a head because, many of us who are in the helping profession spaces, I don't even want to say the medical space or the therapy space or the behavioral health space, but helping profession, which runs the gamut of parents and caretakers to teachers, preachers, anybody who engages with somebody else to help with their well-being. We like to compartmentalize our emotions because when you're working in a crisis situation, you can't articulate that I'm feeling bad, I'm feeling vulnerable, I need some help right now. You might say I need some help, but you're not going to talk about your own emotions because you're afraid of this upheaval that might occur. And so you compartmentalize it, which is fine. You're a doc, you got to compartmentalize that stuff. The problem is that we don't go back to the things that we've compartmentalized. And that's when it starts to fester. And then it starts to kind of manifest where, you talked about people killing themselves and being suicidal without them even realizing it, but it gets expressed with the destructive behavior, the self-medicating, the hiding, the not showing the vulnerability. And then all of a sudden, you wonder why this person looks like a shell of themselves. It's because they are a shell of themselves. They are dying slowly.
Yeah, spot on. I think everything that everybody mentioned was accurate. I think the only thing that I want to add is that we look at it from a standpoint of it's like tribal. I often make my staff and my team, we seek supportive help. I'm actively looking for a therapist. Like I told you, I'm in a new realm as an executive. No one taught me how to be a leader in this type of way and deal with all these different personalities and then come home and be a family man. So I'm like not able to decipher whose needs come first, and that's a lot, right? Like that can become toxic. But when I talk about tribal, it's our responsibility to oftentimes like bring up our younger men. I think as guys, it's that inner boy. So we're looking for that, that team. But my team is my little bros, like the 18, 19-year-old guys who come and they check in on me. Like we create an environment in our space where they have the audacity to come like, yo, you good? You look like you tired. Like they check in on us to keep us human. When you come to our space, our workspace and the facilitation space is like adjacent. There's no doors. There's no one hiding. They can come up to Jack, who's the communications director, Six, who does our digital marketing, right? Because we want our Black boys to see men in space that's doing therapeutic or supportive work. And I think the other thing that we just launched, shameless plug, is last year we put out a wellness website called BWellBro.org because we understand that young men are having conversations with each other digitally. They beefing online, they shooting videos, putting videos out. So we're like, all right, well, how do we get ahead of that and actually be in that environment where they can have something else that they can grab onto? But, if you're looking for a space, come to 7 Marcus Garvey. It is a physical space for brothers. It look like us. It feels like us. It actually smells good. It don't smell like no locker room.
People say it smells like us.
Yeah. I'm not saying that. It got it smells like cologne. It's the way it's supposed to, and there's no locker room talk. We actually in there having real healthy conversations, Irv, and I think that is important. And it's outside of the barbershop. I think that being a barber, and I just want to I love my barbers, but don't go to the barbershop with your issues. And nobody in there trained.
Worst advice ever.
You walking out destroying everything for the most part because we are operating the ego. And I think that we need to be intentional about going to spaces where young men dwell because it keeps us young. And learning from them, not trying to tell them our stories, but allowing them to be inspired about who they are and how they develop so you can actually relearn that little boy that you buried. So that's critical in the work that we do.
Actually, I want to highlight something you articulated going to the spaces where they are. I think a lot of us like to create foundations and organizations where we want people to come to us, but you got to take it. If you were a victim, actually, I should say, if you were a survivor, you're not going to go to some of these places unless you feel welcome. And so a lot of times you got to bring the organization to them. So if you're not going to be in their own comfort space, why should they trust you? You want them to be vulnerable, but you're not being vulnerable yourself. So I think anytime we start doing this community work, we've got to have components where we have a direct linkage to the people and go directly to them. And it might be in their house, it might be at their school, it might be on the corner, but it's got to be in a place that they automatically feel comfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to stay on this kind of thread here. I want to think about more solutions, like thinking about like, well, what are some ideas? I think we have to get creative about, healing and serving our community. And I'm thinking about some of the successes that we see out of Baltimore and what the mayor is doing there and how they've reduced gun violence and homicide significantly. And I just want to just think about like, what are some more creative ways, not just necessarily for the people that you serve, but what about their families? What are some other things that we can kind of envision that we can kind of move forward beyond this? Trymaine, you talk about the idea of the actual dollar amount being something, the cost of every death, I think, is like $5 million you mentioned in the book. And so, like, is that enough to motivate people to say, hey, we should get guns out of our schools, we should get guns out of, people's hands, out of people's homes? What is it going to take? I mean, and you talked about the iron pipeline and thinking about how to disrupt, how guns flow across this country. What do you think some things that we could be pushing our elected officials, or we could even just stand up for ourselves in our own community?
I don't have a lot of hope on the front end of it because everything we're talking about is after the fact. I think the only thing that could start to stanch some of the bleeding is to limit the number of these guns getting into the streets in the first place. This idea of good guys with guns, some of your good guys with guns, the dealers are the bad guys with guns. They're selling it and coming in the front door, going out the back door. We have to limit the number of actual guns we allow these manufacturers to make, because we continue to put profit over people. But I also think that, and this is one of the sadder things in this moment, amid all the great successes of the Baltimores and Chicagos and the Camden, New Jerseys of the world, Camden just the first summer in 50 years they hadn't experienced a homicide, right? Is that all of the onus is on people who are barely scraping by, mostly themselves. They're not heavily resourced. They're people who are showing up every single day, and who's attending to those people? Who's resourcing them? Who's giving them the tools and equipping them with the therapy and the breathing techniques and the check-ins? Who's providing for those folks? Because that's the reason why these cities are experiencing the gains they are, because of the community, right? Those closest to the issue have the solutions, right? So I think it's on the front end, I don't have a lot of hope, but we have these actual tools. They never melt, they never disintegrate, they never rot away. You could shoot somebody and murder somebody with something from 1976, a 38 special. You can still do that now. And so I think we have to get real about that. One creative solution I heard from a pastor in Chicago, he said, why don't we title guns like you do a car? Every step along the way, you're responsible for that. It doesn't matter if somebody stole your car and you're responsible for that car. And so there are ideas, but the issue is the issue of guns and gun violence has been politicized and weaponized, no pun intended.
I kind of have a little bit of a different take. Most of the work that we do doesn't just focus primarily on gun violence and looking at the root causes of trauma. And a lot of the root causes of trauma are tied to social determinants of health, which are the non-medical things that impact our overall health and well-being. You can't expect people to not try to use a firearm to fight for resources. If you got resource in your community, you're not worried about being hungry. If you got a support system, you're not worried about having these fears or a place to process the stresses. If you have an educational institution that's culturally sound and people are readily available, that means you have an environment that's going to help teach you and help you cultivate ways to understand and process information. You're okay, and you'll be in a great space. If you got a health system that's looking at preventative measures and supportive care rather than patching people up, you have a thriving environment. And so I think those are the first things that probably need to be addressed before we start looking at how guns come in. When I was in Chicago, I did my residency training at Cook County Hospital, and back in the early 2000s, we were still getting military before they were getting deployed to somewhere in the Gulf, because Chicago was the closest thing to trauma that you were going to see before you went out to the Middle East, and which was crazy back then, and it's the same thing kind of that exists right now. But when you look at what's required to cultivate support systems that focus people and help people in communities be able to thrive, then things wind up looking a little bit differently. But people don't want to invest in that. Most of the guns that were recovered from Chicago crimes didn't come from the state of Illinois, which had very, very strict gun laws. Same thing in New York State. Most of the guns that were coming from Chicago were coming from states like Indiana. In New York, they're coming from parts of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has very different gun laws. And when you wind up looking at just there are different laws that that govern whether you have a gun that's coming from your primary market, which is coming from your federal licensed gun dealer, compared to your secondary market, which could be from an internet gun show, a thrift store, or anything else. There are different laws that govern. And there's different laws, whether it's a handgun, or if it's an automatic weapon, or if it's a rifle. So until you wind up having something that's going to be really universal, you're not going to wind up changing the situation, particularly if we're you said, turning people over profit. That you're not going to change it. But if you start looking at things that we can control, my father's a community organizer, and he said, you can't expect other people to fund your liberation. And so until you wind up doing that, if you don't take matters into your own hands, if every one of us in this room, as long as you're willing, ready, and available, you should have your own respective organization. It doesn't have to do the same thing that everybody else does, but it should be complementary. If I know you're working with young men of color that are ages 10 to 12, then we need to work from 13 to 15. Another group needs to have another age group. Another group needs to have somebody else in another age category. If we're focusing on mental health and therapy, then another group needs to focus on job training and development. There's plenty of this work to go around. But if even in this violence intervention space, a lot of our organizations are at conflict with one another because everybody's looking at the same people for funding streams. And you rather, if your organization is trying to survive, then you go, oh, well, I'm doing this and that organization is not doing that, and it becomes super, super petty. So you got people doing violence intervention work that have beef with one another purely based on the survivability of their organizations, which kind of leads to the overall issues tied to structural violence and structural trauma. So until you start looking at this stuff from a very systematic way that allows resources to flow and fund these things into areas that aren't being supported, we're going to keep having the same conversation another 5, 10, 20, 50 years.
I want to jump in real quick, Barry, before you go. One thing that I think is interesting is that we have to find creative ways to solve the issue when people with full bellies aren't shooting each other, and people with good paychecks and warm homes aren't shooting each other. But the idea is, like, how can we do it when it's like create opportunity for people so they can be well fed and housed and have a quality health care, education, and all that?
Yeah, I dropped the mic. So here's the thing. I don't subscribe to nothing those things said. I mean, we are literally, for decades, having conversations around propaganda about our communities and how devastated they are. And yes, we have issues. Yes, we have things that we need to work out. Hell yeah, we need to keep certain people out of our communities. But I believe that we're not going to do that until we actually get a little micro and we focus on the structure of developing young people, period. With all of the chaos that is happening in the world, yes, it impacts me personally, but we go inside of the B.R.O space and we give them the context that they need so that way they can thrive and they can live another day. And we have seen the results of young men coming into our space and literally walking maybe 500 yards and feeling like they need to have a face mask on, a bulletproof vest, to after 5 months of being in the program, they don't even realize that they're not even wearing the shiesty anymore. And that is because they have a sense of self and they have a sense of belonging and they start to understand their community differently. We ain't need news headlines for that. We don't need for someone to come and swoop in and try to save us. I am going to do this work because I just can't stop doing it because I love young people and I love to see people win. And I think that we need to get into that habit. Think about Fred Hampton. They killed him because of that movement. And that movement was based in, we don't give, I know it's a prestigious place, we don't give a shit what's happening outside of this community because we care about our community. We are the revolution. So I just want people to be a bit more empowered because what's in the news is real to some degree, right? But it's also built to make us feel like we can't do it without them. And we can, and I'll prove it, even to the point of what Doc talked about with the grants. When we first started the organization, everybody told us oh, you got to be like this, or you don't have that. And I was like, well, you ain't doing it. I know you got access to the money, but you're not doing what I'm saying works. So take your money and we'll see you the next round, right? And after a while, I was so audacious with it. I don't know, it was something people just were you know what? He's that crazy to tell me no for $200,000. I think I better give it to him. And every time I sit in a room with people who have access to the money, who say they want to help, if you're not with me, then you can't tell me how we need to nurture our children. Give me the money, take a picture. We appreciate you. We really, really, really appreciate you. But this is our homework. And I think that we need to have that level of audaciousness because we are the protectors for the next generation. And let's not allow the chaos of society to make us feel like everything is on fire, because it's not. And even what it is, it's still beauty in the burns, right? There's still beauty in the chaos that we can pull out. And I think that that's the notion that I want people to walk away with. Know that, yes, there's things happening, but you still have the power to impact. When we look at our work, and it's the last thing I'm gonna say, every young man in our programs who make it past 24, 25, 26, they have to some degree beaten the school to prison pipeline. That young man has 5 generations attached to who he is. So when we allow him to make it through, and I think about Tyrell Pope, who's a young man that I mentor, he's a father of 2 now, right? He's 28, he went to Eagle Academy, he's still with me. He literally just changed the trajectory of 5 generations. So if I have 10 young men who come through the same type of program, I'm already, just by supporting him, supporting the future. And we don't want to look at it like that because we are built to only focus on the fire. And we cannot. I don't know when this thing is going to change, but what I do know is that every young person that you inspire, or every young person in your household that you inspire, that's 5 generations attached to them. That's why they kill us. That's why they lock us up. Because just the same on the other side, every young man who dies, that's 5 generations that disappear. Every young man that goes to prison, that's 5 generations that's impacted. That's science.
Yeah.
That's science, y'all. That's why in the 60s and the 70s, daddies disappeared. That's why eugenics, when the mother wanted to go in public housing, father couldn't be there. That's science. So that when we do the work, and I digress here, we do it from that lens. I'm never gonna see everything. I'm never gonna see all of the fruits of it, but I know it's working. So I try not to fall victim to the propaganda of the world.
Brothers.
Sorry about my passion. I'm sorry.
No. You never need to apologize for the passion. I just want to say thank you, brothers, and I love you. I love the work that you're doing, and we're going to open it up here to the audience to see if we have some questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. This is so needed at this point. First, I want to I agree with everything you said. Thank you, Mr. Lee. I know you as president of National Action Network, Brooklyn chapter. And me and Barry started out like 2008. Here's a question. I live in Bed-Stuy, I still do, run a program. And sorry, doctor, I know you and I know both of you guys. My program started out actually in 2009, so it was out there for about 16 years and dealt with nonviolence. After a triple shooting in the park, and then they raped the park attendant the next day. So that was kind of crazy for me to start out. Here's my question. Some of the numbers in Bed-Stuy, and I attend all of these workshops, some of the numbers are saying that gun violence is down, especially in Bed-Stuy. Barry, you heard that before, 79, 77 precinct. And I see that it is, because I walk the streets. I just don't read books, okay? What do you think that's due to? The work of the police, the work of you, or the work of gentrification? And that's why I believe gun violence is somewhat down, because of the last one. And I know the work Barry does. Barry started out with 209, 2010 together. So can you give me your view, Mr. Lee?
I'm going to turn to the professionals first.
I was going to say,
I'm a chronicler, but these guys are actually doing it. I would love to hear what you guys say.
so, we all live in the same neighborhood. I live in the style also. I'm on Bainbridge and Ralph. And I work at Kings County Hospital, and we still get, we get a lot of the cases still coming from Bed-Stuy. I always make it a point to ask, where did this shooting take place? One, I want to know if it took place on my block or not, or did it take place on a block where we have friends and family that also live? But it also kind of gives me an idea of how the demographics are shifting in the neighborhood. The traumas that we see coming from Bed-Stuy come from the same places that haven't necessarily been gentrified per se, that also have the same levels of poverty that have always existed in Bed-Stuy since we can remember. Like the stuff that's coming from Marcus Garvey, it's going to come from Louis Armstrong houses, it's going to come from like Roosevelt. It's going to come from those places because you got these pockets of poverty, and around the world, New York City is no different. Any place where you have a sharp demarcation between the haves and the have-nots, you're going to see rises in violence, which is why you see all this stuff happening in other parts of the world where you have refugee camps, where you have border states where one place is in conflict, another state is not necessarily in conflict. You're going to see high levels of violence in those areas. I think a lot of this stuff is just shifting. A friend of mine, one of our Morehouse brothers, is the mayor of Newburgh, New York. A lot of this people who can't afford New York City, they start moving out to parts of Long Island. They start moving further up along the Hudson River. I went to medical school in Buffalo, New York, which is a war zone in inner city Buffalo, and looks like something we thought Brownsville in the 80s and the 70s looked rough. It looks nothing. It looks worse than anything I could have ever imagined because the poverty just shifts. And so until you wanna, if we look at it, we have to follow what's the economic basis of the community that we're affecting. Saying, oh wow, is violence really there, or is it going just up the street and following where that population has lived, who is being impacted by that violence? Follow them for about 10, going around about 10 or 15 years. Then you really know whether or not the situation has changed or not.
Yeah, and to just add on real quick, I think it's all of those things. I think it's forms of gentrification. I think there's forms of black culture being on the rise. I think we got like a lot of young black African Americans and African and people from the diaspora really embracing culture and bringing that into communities, specifically in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And then to Doc's point, when we look at some of the houses, Roosevelt, like all of the housing developments, you're talking 15, 16, 17 apartment buildings, 5 apartments on each floor, no running water, decay, elevators not working. You ever walked up project stairs when the elevator out? That's enough to make you want to beat up a whole household when you get to the first floor, or either pass out, right? So I think that there's that. We need better quality of life. And if we don't have better quality of life, then people are going to fight. I don't know if y'all remember the summer of the blackout that just recently happened a couple of years ago. We had 2 days of that, and it was chaos in the city, even in Bensonhurst. So, those things happen. So I think that it's a little bit of all of that hodgepodge of change, culture, elevating, and then when the areas that we see that still have a simmer, those young people need support.
But also, look, Bed-Stuy is one thing, but it's happening all across the country.
Yes.
So there is something big happening, and so many organizations like yours are popping up all across the country, and folks are activated. It's no surprise that it's Bed-Stuy, and it's Baltimore, and it's parts of Chicago, and it's Camden, and all these other places.
Yeah, and they're resourcing us, right? Like, I think that's the other part. We can't put these resources post-incarceration. I think that in order for us to thrive, we need to put the resources that we mentioned it earlier. But just to reiterate, we need to put the resources in the mental health supports, like throw all of it in it. Just because we're talking about trauma, we have to throw all of the money. I mean, every dollar that you got. And if you hear and you know an organization that's doing the work, it's your responsibility to subscribe to it. You got Netflix, you got all of these apps on your phone. Delete an app, $16.99, and donate that to an organization. And be a recurring donor, because that actually helps the work and it's critical.
If there are any funders out in the audience, one thing that I think is important to do this community work is that you have to have people who can do this work and make a living wage. The problem is, so many of our respective organizations have staff members who are being underpaid, and they do the work because they're passionate about it, because they're from the community. But when you're underfunded, you're underpaid, you got a lot of passion, but eventually that passion fades out. You start suffering from compassion fatigue, and then you start getting mad at the people that you intended to serve. Or it winds up consuming your physical health, and then you wind up like, man, why'd you have a heart attack at age 38? That's a lot of trauma and stress that you're taking on. Why are you having people having strokes? We know people who've had strokes. We've had people who've had all these autoimmune things. That's a chronic response to ongoing stress without any way to process it. And people are being consumed in a negative way who are trying to do this community work. And if we wind up dying, we wind up becoming incapacitated, then you don't have a generation who can benefit from your expertise. And so I think it's important that we consider what the resources are required to make sure that these organizations can stay afloat and thrive and be able to, so people can take care of their families and continue to do this work. If not, then we're going to keep having the same conversation.
Hi, Kange Kanene. I live in downtown Brooklyn. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Two separate questions, if that's allowed. The first is, for anyone that can answer, what work are you doing to educate young men about what it means to be engaged in sexual interactions, and so what it means to have contraception and thinking about family planning and, waiting till you're financially or emotionally ready to have kids, because I think that is the root of a lot of this. And the second one, the young man just talked about how you can be under-resourced in terms of talent. But I think overwhelmingly with people of color, when we're trying to solve problems, the default assumption is to do that you have to start a nonprofit. So have you thought about ways to incorporate revenue generation to be more sustainable in the community?
Yeah, good question.
Excellent question. I think in terms of family planning, our organization does that with our school programs. We have 6 schools that we work with in Brooklyn. They're providing, we have a whole curriculum focused on conflict resolution, mediation, and a lot of life skills development. We have students from Downstate School of Public Health who are part of our initial founding team and have helped us develop curriculum focusing on sex education and family planning. And then when it's needed on a larger level, we outsource to other organizations that do that. The other what was the second part of your question? You said something. Right. We've been, Barry's learning this more so now, but we were having these conversations. When we first met, we were running our organization out of our pockets, and we were a pure volunteer-based organization until, it's been more than 10 years now, but for the first 2.5 years, actually first 5 or 6 years, we were primarily volunteer-based. You got to diversify your funding stream anytime you do this stuff. Now we've got partnerships with government, with New York City, I want to say federal government, who are interested in funding programs tied to violence intervention. But you can't just have government funding, because we know that government funding doesn't come when we want it to. And it might take anywhere from 4 months to 2 years for you to access your government funding. So if you don't have a private foundation that's supporting you, or if you don't have a revenue generating stream like a store or have a contract, well, we have government contracts, but still, if you don't have somebody who can front that money, you wind up shutting down. And a lot of our city-based organizations that have had to go into furlough purely because they didn't have that diversified funding stream. You have a mixture of public and private funding, kind of like in business. You have what they call the PPPs, public-private partnerships. That allows for organizational sustainability, that allows you to stay afloat so that you can make payroll, so you can wind up keeping the food coming. When you the first things that start coming, first they cut, you start, sneaking back on the amount of food. You went from having full meals to peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Then it goes to peanut butter to, we just got some snacks. And for people who come into your organization because they need to eat, and that's one of the social determinants, having access to food, you wind up losing a lot of people. So we are working on a lot of those business models, and even some of our organizations are moving away from the nonprofit model because it's a big headache and hassle with doing the nonprofit stuff because you don't have access to the same kind of funding streams.
Yeah, and you talked about also sexual health, right? Like relationships with young women. So we do that a lot. In our work, we find that there's a lot of young men, and I think this is a pandemic that we're actually, as a team, talking about, and we're trying to get funding for. I don't know why people don't think that funding fathers is a thing, because we got this notion that all black men are deadbeats, right? But if they are, why we're not giving them the resources? They don't have access to adequate programming. And for some reason, I don't know, political leaders, it's just absent-minded. It's like, as long as the child is in daycare and mom gets the support to make sure the child is in daycare, the dad doesn't get anything. So we actively engage young fathers. We have a situation right now that we're working through as a team where one of our young men just got evicted. His girlfriend and his child have a stable place to go. He has to go now in the shelter. So luckily we are there to support him, because that's an invisible story. The other thing is that I want to make it clear, I am a social entrepreneur. I'm a social entrepreneur with the 501c3. So I operate it from a business standpoint. I don't look at it from a corporate standpoint. I'm like, we are doing work. I want to pay quality salaries to my staff. So I think about it from that diversify. How do we get contracts from schools? How do we get the discretionary funding from the political leaders? In fact, I demand that, like, hey, if you in here, I'm doing good work, you have to give that to me governmentally. And then also grants and funding. And we go hard. Like I make sure that I put a lot of resources in having a team a communications and development team to make sure that we are building that surplus, because we see ourselves as an organization that's going to be funding newer organizations doing this work. And that's critical. And then also, I think you were asking whether we expose our young people to for-profit work. If you were, on the other hand of our work, we do what we call critical consciousness work. So we teach them about the systems, but then we also allow them to stream. We get them cameras, whatever it is that they feel like they want to do or need access to, we make sure that we get them the access to it.
Okay, hey Barry, how are you? My name is Ken Granderson, and I have a question about organizations using technology. Does anyone know if any of our organizations are really using technology effectively? And I'm asking from the perspective of 1996, I tried to get the National African American Leadership Summit, the randomly men March local organizing committees, to talk to each other, using systems that I had 20,000 folks in Boston talking to each other every day. They didn't get it. I put the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation online in '98. They didn't get it. And I gave up on Boston, came back to the Sty, where I grew up, and I've started connecting with some folks, but I'm wondering, is there any Black organization today, when we have the combined knowledge of the human race in the palm of our hands, and we can talk to each other for free, to strategize, to connect, to organize, because I'm just not understanding how we have not got the memo yet.
I do know of an organization. One of my best friends has a company called Link Learning, and I think it's transforming. But they've been training school districts on how to access the technology in the schools since before the pandemic. And now, when pandemic hit, they were like, wow, we've already been doing this stuff. And so it's easier for them to have access. Schools districts they want to buy smart boards, they want to buy iPads, they want to buy all the technology just to say that we have it, but nobody actually uses it. I think pandemic has forced people to utilize technology in a different way because everything was kind of shut down, at least in public spaces. The problem that we're having now is not having the technology, but are we using the technology as a specific tool rather than a tool for self-medication? There's nothing wrong with social media. The problem is when you keep scrolling on social media to get that dopamine response because you need a dopamine hit because you're an ADHD person who's never learned how to self-regulate, that's when these tools of these technological advances wind up becoming a problem. And we wind up seeing the negative effects of that because now you have a person who's been scrolling and utilizing technology who can no longer sleep. You can't sleep, then what happens the next day? You've got to self-medicate with caffeine so you can function. But you
feel seen, brother?
Yeah. Yeah, but then you can't go to sleep at night because you've been overly caffeinated with Celsius drinks, energy drinks, you name it, Red Bull, and so you got to smoke a bunch of weed to be able to fall asleep at night or drink alcohol. And then you got to get it back up in the morning the next day, and so you have this yo-yo effect, and you factor in, poor nutritional insight. To begin with, you really have a ticking time bomb. So we have to figure out, not necessarily the technology is there, but how do we use it during short bursts or specific bursts that are tied to upward mobility and economic development and program sustainability and program augmentation so that it becomes a popular tool. But Link Learning is one organization or one company that I know that's been doing that. They also kind of moved on to some stuff. I think it's called Your Way. They have an AI platform now that's being utilized for purely as an education tool for teachers, so they can utilize technology in the education space. Oh, sorry. I guess who's got the mic? Oh, sorry.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you very much. I have enjoyed listening to you. And I've wondered, when you spoke about the B.R.O organization, I am thinking, is there something similar that mirrors what you do for the mothers? After you've worked with the young men, you mentioned that you gave them tools to go home to be able to de-escalate something at home. But then I would think that we need to train the moms and the young ladies to deal with the situation as well. So are there organizations that focus on women the way you focus on the men?
Yeah, so our organization actually works with all different groups. We work with young men, we work with young women, we work with members of the alphabet community, depending on what pronouns they may use. We also work with parents and caretakers because we know that they're a natural part of the support system. That's no matter what aspect of our organization. For our hospital program, we have to work with with women. I mean, we have young men and young women who experienced violent trauma, but the first person we identify as who's the person who everybody's paying attention to, who's coming to visit that person who's been injured in the hospital. That's the person we work with because that's the person that everybody's going to wind up falling in line and listening to, and most of the time it tends to be the mom or the aunt. So we work with them providing any kind of support services. Matter of fact, we encourage them, like, look, do you need counseling services? You've gone through a traumatic experience. I know your child is the one who's lying on the stretcher who's been injured, but we know what trauma you're taking in, just processing it, because this is somebody that's come from you who you're responsible for, and we need you to be at your best. If you can be at your best, that means you can help this person process their trauma. So we do have that, and if we can't do that, we link them up to other behavioral health resources within the hospital. I think the beauty about being, working in Kings County is that we get this connection with all the other services within the hospital. If we can't, we outsource it. You mentioned earlier, Trymaine had talked about having organizations that are specifically tied to the community. I think historically, women have done a tremendous job at fostering community development. Guys suck at it. We're terrible at it, unless if it's a sports-related thing, then you wind up doing it. If it's a bar-related thing, then you see us there. If it's a barbershop-related thing, then you see us there. But not all barbers are given the greatest advice, and so you got to be really mindful of those spaces. So I think women have traditionally always had support systems, but we do encourage them to participate in the stuff that we're doing on the school level, on the hospital level, in the public housing units that we work with. We're at Wyckoff houses and Gowanus houses. We have there a lot of women who participate in our community program site over at Restoration Plaza. They're women who are part of these systems. Matter of fact, our organization wouldn't be afloat if it weren't for women in the community helping support and give us the insight. Guys have great ideas. Women are 1,000 times better at execution. I know my ADHD self can't do certain things unless we had women on our team that had the insights to be able to balance and create a level of structure so that we can carry out these missions. And so you have to have all different members of the community who are considered most vulnerable be a part of the solution-making process and an integral part of the programming.
Yeah, what Doc said. Everything he said was spot on, even the last part. There's a thing with our black and brown brothers that we just need. We need us time. And we really, really need that because women, all the women in this room, y'all have been a stand for men. And even if you didn't know how to do it, you try to find a way to figure it out, and we salute you for that. There's a little boy inside of us that we need to really peel back layers. And this is the first time I'm probably saying this, we need men to really illuminate and step up and be empathetic human beings so that way our black and brown boys need to grow. Now, there is space, and we need to create space for our sisters because when that man starts to shift himself, don't tell him to man up. Don't have low tolerance because you thought in your mind you was hiring Superman or you was getting Superman in your life. Even Kryptonite took out Superman. So I think that there's some tools that women need to learn as a man is embarking on this journey of expression that we don't often get, right? Because there's still a nuance in the way that you think about who we need to be for you, right? And we need to create a world where we are actually thinking about self in a way that what does he need and what do I need to grow? So I think that there's workshops for that. But I just want to salute all the women in here and us brothers. Whether you black and white, this ain't just subjugated to black and brown men. White men in this room, y'all need help too. Say it with me. White men in the room, we need help too. Because a lot of things are happening outside, and when you pull that mask down, it's a white man behind that, and we cannot so that's a level of toxic masculinity and guns and all of those things. And if we don't say it out loud, my white brothers, if you don't say it out loud, it will never get fixed, right? When we think about the upper echelons of our government, it is one complexion, right? And that's all good and dandy. But if you're gonna be up there, you got to heal yourself. You got to heal that xenophobia. You got to heal the biasness. You got to heal the fear that somebody's gonna take a whole country from you that wasn't even yours in the first place, right? Like, so there's a lot of undoing that we have to do as men, period. Because there's 1,000 ways that Trymaine talked about all of the men in the book, right? Whether it was the oppressor or it was the person that was fighting against the oppression. We all are unhealthy, right? I'm just the first to admit it, right? So I think that's what we need to do.
That's what I wanted to say. I was focusing more on the women who were taking care of those young men in the homes.
Yeah.
That was what I'm talking about. Are they being trained
We-
how to take care
We do know, we have program, we do stuff, we work specifically with parents and caretakers to help train them so they can actually go back home. We meet with them on an ongoing basis. Matter of fact, we meet with them sometimes more than the actual patient in the hospital because the patient don't want to return your phone calls because they're dealing with their own traumas. They haven't been able to process it yet. And so we have to actually, they're our main support system. But, you know, we do that. There are also other organizations in Harlem that I think is, oh man, what's the sister's name? It's not Mothers Against Gun Violence. Yeah, Aisha. Yeah, what's it? MAD, right? Street Corner Resource. There was another name of the organization beforehand. I can't remember what it was called before, but it'll come back to me. No, that's Erica Ford's organization out in Queens. But there are organizations that provide that. There aren't as many ones that provide that same support for the guys, which is why we're standing up here doing this stuff. There was when we first launched our organization, KAVI. We got somebody had pitched us and said, we want you to do something with the Lower East Side Girls Club. We were like, wow, they got a multi-million-dollar endowment. They have a full brownstone. They had like a observatory deck. And they said, we got amazing programming for girls on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. But these girls bring their little brothers and their nephews to the programs, and the little boys, they're just sitting out there in the lobby area not doing anything. So we wanted to see if we can have you guys come around. We never got the grant, but you had that support system for the women in that community, but the little boys were just kind of left aside. And that's something we see often, even in education spaces. Who are the kids that wind up speaking up a lot more in the schools, with the exception of some of the schools that are separated based on the sexes? It's always women. It's nothing against the young women who are able to speak up and articulate for themselves. But if you don't, as a guy, I know that I can be honest and I can say certain things in a room full of guys that I can't say in a room full of women or people who identify as women. When we know the work that Barry and I were doing at Eagle Academy for boys, even the work we were doing at Wingate High School campus and the other schools, we always separate our groups based on the sexes because we can have very different conversations and we see different levels of vulnerability become expressed when you wind up having people of a very similar background and all in one area. It's particularly the same gender, or at least the same gender that's expressed. And so I think you have to have these compartmentalized groups, but then you also have to have times where you kind of come together to have this conversation so that we don't wind up existing in silos.
So we have time for two more questions, one here, rapid fire. I have something I want to ask everybody. When we wrap up, this room needs to be reset, all the chairs need to be stacked, and so on and so forth. So I know everyone's going to want to talk more, but please do me a favor and move to the front, the other side of this wall, so that my colleagues can come in here and do their job and go home. So two last questions.
Thank you. This question is for Trymaine. I remember back in 2015 sitting with my two sons who were 8 and 10 then, with family members watching the uprising around the Freddie Gray death and being so disappointed at the reaction of when the mother came out and was beating her kid for all the world to see, and how from family members to commentators, everyone seemed to think that that was a great thing. Yeah. So I want to know, what are 2 or 3 practical things we can do to get society to realize at every level that violence against Black men and boys is just not acceptable?
That's a great question. I think part of the problem is that it's not a defect of our society. It's part of it. It's fundamental. The violence against black men. When we think about how you want to control the people, you control their men, right? And that's why we're incarcerated. That's why no one blinks an eye when we're shot and killed by the police but us. And so I think part of the problem is reorienting a whole society's worldview, right? And who's who it's acceptable to beat upon, who's acceptable to heap the weight of the world, whose shoulders that should rest on. And I think we've bought into that, and we've passed on that violence, that we have to make sure, and sometimes we've seen women do this in particular, a way of protecting the boys is to try to whip them into shape, to try to beat them back into position. And we've seen all these different cudgels, and the cudgel for us as black men has always been violence. And so I think part of it is, and I hate the idea of this, and I've done it as a journalist throughout my entire career, is we have to remind people that we are human too. And we have to humanize ourselves in our music, in our literature, the way we create film. We have to continue to do that. And I hate that we have to, because we always have known the full breadth of our humanity. It's just been so limited. And I remember that, man. It was heartbreaking to see that we're just replicating the same violence. But the same way white folks are miseducated in this country, so are we. The same way they have this ingrained thing in us that's been passed on, we have that sometimes too. And that's why we can sometimes look at our brother and see something that is loathsome, because we see something loathsome in ourselves. And we learn that from the society. And so I think it's incumbent upon those of us with the privileges and resources and means and intellect and ideas and access to create a space for us to reveal our full humanity.
Yeah, I just want to just add a little tidbit to that too. I think, and it goes back to what I said earlier, it should have been a man there to console her fears, right? And teach her. Like, it makes me think of something that happened today in the house with me and my wife and my son. She was teaching him. We had to keep him home today. And, they were working on his letters. And he needed a moment. And I could see her like, nah, we gotta do this, right? So I heard something in her voice that triggered the little boy in me. And I was like, okay, how do I approach that, right? Because I'm trying to speak for August. And we often had those beautiful conversations. And I love the fact that she hears me, because I had trauma in school. But what I didn't know was that she gave August the break. August took the break, and I'm thinking like he wanted to go to sleep. So I'm like, yo, bro, go to sleep, because there's a lot more. There's no books on that table waiting for you. And because they had the conversation, August jumped off the couch and went back to the books and finished the work. So we're still having a text conversation around our approach, and she heard my point of view, and I heard her point of view. And then when she finished, out of nowhere, she was like, yo, babe, how was that? Did I speak to his, because we like to be fidgety, boys fidget. Like, he doing the work, he touching everything while he's learning, and I just try to give her context, but she doubled back. After I wasn't even thinking, I'm thinking about something else, and she was like, how was that? And I was like, yo, that was amazing. So I think that to the question, yes, it was horrifying, but it was a million men around there. Why none of those men had the relationship with that family to go and have the conversation with their sister on how she was trying to save her kid? Because that's Mama Bear. If danger come, Mama Bear will bite a baby bear and take off running. You think she don't care if she biting that bear, right? It's about survival, and survival is traumatic. So I think that we need to figure out as a community, how are we having conversations and how are we showing up where those things don't have to happen like that anymore, or we can simmer them as much as we possibly can. And I think it's a coming of age for us black men to stop saying that we're traumatic and we're in trauma, which we are. There's a lot of us healed out here, and our voices need to rise.
And how do we as men start having the conversation about whether we know we're not always able to protect our community and protect ourselves and our women and our children, but how do we begin to put ourselves in a position, are we doing an adequate enough job of protecting our community, right? Because we're all equal here, men and women, we're all pulling our weight here, but we are the men of the community. And so if we're not there to protect our people, who will be, right?
I think some of the stuff too is a matter of context. I don't think the woman might have had the same reaction if it were a space where you didn't have the same sets of eyes on them. In the ER, when we have somebody who's has a mental health challenge and they're dysregulated, part of my practice is let me remove you from the situation, because if you're already, some people are feeding off of the energy of the crowd, and you have more eyes on you, that means I have to exercise control, because as a parent, if you can't exercise control over your kid in public space, what are they going to think of me? And it kind of comes back to ego. So, but I find if I have somebody who's going through some stuff, and you can see when the voices start to get loud, and I work the evening and overnight shifts, and so everybody's wide awake and pissed off. But if I already see that they're becoming dysregulated, I go, let me holler at you for a second. Come to this other room, and that way there's nobody else around. As long as I feel safe. I feel pretty safe most of the time in the ER, unless somebody's like really going through a break, and then we have to sedate them if that's the case. But I take them to a nice private room. I take them outside of the emergency department where you don't have 50 people laying on stretchers and everybody staring at you, because they're still trying to figure out how to process their emotions. Many of us know two emotions. We know angry and we know happy. And so if they don't understand that I'm fearful or I'm scared or I'm confused, they know if I'm not happy, then my response is anger. And if I'm going to be angry, I know what my conditioned response is going to be. So until you create these places and these houses of, there could be a little bit of a respite. So Brother Quadjo, one of my homies, runs the high school for Ember Charter School, and they have these different rooms at least in the lower school. They have the JED room and the Sankofa room, and these are rooms where the kids who are having some challenges, they can go process their emotions. It's quiet. Some of them are cushioned, but they can reflect on their thoughts. How many times we see somebody out on the street or somebody in our home environment that we allow them to have that space to process? We're like, no, you got to answer me right now. You might not be able to answer that person right now. Let them regulate. They got to figure out how to regulate. As long as they're not being destructive to the other person that's there, then that might be their process. I started learning the science behind my kid having tantrums. When they're jumping up and down, that's proprioceptive input. That triggers your vagus nerve and causes your body to go into a relaxation mode. You got to jump up and down. Grown men, we fight every week. Matter of fact, we're supposed to have Fight Club tomorrow morning. Grown men fighting and rolling around. Yeah. Well, they don't know where it is. But just the tumbling and rolling around, when you have kids and they're flopping on the floor and they're tumbling around, especially guys like your son August, he's bumping into things, he's moving around. He's trying to calm his nervous system down. So there are a lot of behaviors that we see people enacting that we don't even realize. That's them processing their trauma. That's them processing their stress. And if they can process it, give them a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes, then we can have a different conversation. But we're so used to this control and contain model that anything that looks a little bit different is considered pathologic. If it's pathologic, we got to suppress it and stamp it out.
If I can add really quickly, we can't continue to confuse discipline for dominance. And I think discipline is important. I think we all need that. But we can't control and try to dominate, our ways into being better people. And I think one of the more uncomfortable things that we have to continue to work towards is unlearning all of this toxicity, right? And we all have talked about this, and that's okay, but we all need grace, men, women, anyone, however you identify, we all need grace. There are some of us who are healed and are better equipped to kind of deal with it, and we need those people to step up, to your point. And so I think it's important. We can't keep continuing to confuse discipline for dominance.
That's right.
One final question.
I'd like to thank all of you. This has been a wonderful conversation. It's launched so many ideas, so many things in my head, some in agreement with you, some questioning some of the things that you had to say. But I hope that this isn't the end when you say goodnight tonight. That's the most important thing that I hope will come out of this, that this is launching a conversation, whether it's throughout Brooklyn, whether it's throughout New York, whether it's throughout the country, but launching continuous conversations around these individual issues that each one could take one night, whether it's talking about gun violence, whether it's talking about education, whether it's talking about how we deal with the stuff that we internally deal with through drugs, through alcohol, through violence, through any number of things. All of these things could take up twice the amount of time that we've talked in the conversation tonight. But we have to do things in collaboration when it comes to how we deal with it in community, because there is a limited amount of funding, because we don't talk about things in a way that is going to expand what we're doing, because conservatives or people who don't support what we're doing talk about it like a way that makes you uncomfortable, saying that we should go to the government and get funding. That's our money. We're not begging for someone else's money. If the people in this room that works, we're asking for our money for our communities, and we should feel comfortable with that. But we also shouldn't be treating everything that we do like we're recreating the wheel. There are so many of us who have figured out how to do things effectively, but because we're so concerned about, if I share this, will I become less relevant? And we have to figure out, without having to get a dime, how we can all become more effective, how our communities can become more effective by collaborating. Your question about technology? Yes. Well, first of all, technology has been failing communities, white, black, whatever. You go to West Virginia, and they were told 25 years ago that they needed to retool. They didn't retool. And so now they're blaming it on immigrants, they're blaming it on foreign nations, they're blaming it on everybody else. You go to the Midwest with the car industries, everybody has failed. But there are plenty of organizations that are using technology in African American, Latino, and Asian, and all types of communities, all the time. When you look at the protest movements that have taken place, the biggest protest movements, they've all been most effective because of the use of technology. You want to talk about Black Lives Matter movement and all those, it's the use of technology that has moved things forward. Inside of our own communities of color, self-publishing in music, in writing, in so many areas is because of an understanding of technology, but it's not being shared enough because we're not collaborating enough. And so people who are in other industries who could be using that, and other groups that could be using it, we're just not coming together enough and using it enough. But there are organizations, go to the Brooklyn Foundation. They are funding so many groups throughout Brooklyn that are using technology and advancing technology. You'll be able to find out the answer to your question there. You'll be able to find it out at the New York Foundation. There are so many places. But I do hope that there'll be a continued conversation, because so much of what you guys are talking about tonight is so important, but it's not new. Nothing that you guys have said tonight is new. I started my youth program when I came back from college in '92, and there's nothing that you guys are talking about that we weren't seeing back then. There's nothing that I was talking about back then that people weren't seeing in the 70s, and the 60s, and the 50s. You walked us through a history lesson that was so important. But to pretend that there hasn't been tremendous change is a huge, huge mistake, because we don't take enough credit for the great change that has taken place, and that will give the young people around us and our communities faith that getting involved is worth a damn, because they'll see that change has taken place and that they can bring further change.
Thank you, good brother. Thank you. I will say this in the spirit of that idea. Yeah, we can give it up. In the spirit of that, I want to thank the panel and of course Irvin for being a great moderator. This has been the panel of my dreams. When I wrote this book, I really did want this to be a vehicle to have these kind of conversations. I didn't want to just have book talks around the country, which I did that too, but I also wanted to make sure we're seeding these ideas and seeding this conversation in community. And so even during the worst of times, after Reconstruction was torn down and there was the bloody summer and we were under the pinch of white supremacy, we still continued to build communities and institutions and conversations and all that. And so hopefully we're walking in that spirit. So hopefully this isn't the last. So thank you guys. Thanks. Is that it? Thank you. I will be signing books right out front. Thank you.
Yeah, right out front. Thank you guys.